Pursuant to Governor Baker's March 12, 2020 order suspending certain provisions of the open meeting law, General Law 30A, Section 18, and the Governor's February 12, 2022 revised order extending remote participation by all members in any meeting of a public body. This meeting of the Great Barrington Finance Committee will be conducted via remote participation to the greatest extent possible. Specific information on the general guidelines for remote participation by members of the public and or parties with a right and or requirement to attend this meeting can be found on the town's website. For this meeting, members of the public who wish to listen to the meeting may do so in the following manner. Please see the instructions at the top of the agenda. No in-person attendance of members of the public will be permitted, but every effort will be made to ensure that the public can adequately access the proceedings in real time via technological means. Pursuant to Massachusetts General Law 7C 30A, Section 20F, after notifying the chair of the public body, any person may make a video or audio recording of an open session of a meeting of a public body, or may transmit the meeting through any medium. At the beginning of the meeting, the chair shall inform other attendees of any such recordings. Any member of the public wishing to speak at the meeting must receive permission of the chair. Anne, can you tell us who is recording? Do you see that information?
I don't have any information recording. I'm recording as the person who's logged on as the town. I don't know if anyone else is, anybody else recording? If you want to raise your hand and let me know. Anybody who's an attendee? It doesn't, I'm not getting any, no one else is recording.
Okay, so roll call vote of the members. Anne?
This is Ann O'Dwyer, and I'm here.
And Meredith?
Here.
Tom?
I'm here.
Okay, and this is Philip Ornstein, and I'm here as well. Okay, so we're going to move around the agenda a bit to accommodate the schedules of some of our speakers. So we're going to move to item 9 on the agenda, and that's a presentation by Peter Dillon, the superintendent of schools at the Berkshire Hills Regional School District. Before I turn it over to Peter, I just have a brief comment that I'd like to read, a brief statement that I'd like to read, very brief. This is the first of what is likely to be a series of discussions this committee will have over the next months and years regarding this latest effort to address the deteriorating condition of Monument Mountain High School. What is envisioned is a very significant and large investment in our community and our young people. I believe our task is to focus on the financial aspects of this proposed project. How much it will cost, where will that money come from, and are those funds being properly spent? In other words, to make sure the taxpayer funds are used efficiently and productively. It's not just about yes or no, support or not support. For this committee, it's about the specific financial details of each alternative. Like I said, the total cost, how it is allocated among the member towns according to the prevailing agreements, and the net cost to the Great Barrington taxpayers, both in the current year and in the future. Therefore, it is my hope that our diligent and detailed financial questions will not be overly interpreted as supportive or not supportive of a particular proposal. Rather, it is this committee simply doing its job. On that note, I'll turn it over to Peter. Obviously, if anyone else wants to make any comments or obviously questions to Peter, there'll be plenty of time for that after we let Peter speak. So I'll turn it over to Peter.
Okay, thanks so much. First of all, I really appreciate you being flexible around the timing of this. What I'm coming tonight to ask you for you to consider is recommending the warrant article that you have, which will go before the voters at the town meeting, and that's requesting the borrowing in the amount of $1.5 million for a feasibility study. What I want to do is sort of start a little bit, go back and start at the beginning about this, and I'll take maybe 2 or 3 minutes to just give you a quick sort of overview of where we're at, and then respond to questions. Many of you remember around 8-9 years ago, we had 2 failed votes in Great Barrington around a proposal for a renovation and addition of the high school. Since those failed votes, we really took stock and have done a tremendous amount of work. And probably the most significant thing was we redid the regional agreement, particularly focusing on the capital assessment formula. So for those who've worked at school budgets before, it used to be our capital assessments or our capital projects were assessed at the percentage of kids in each town, Great Barrington, Stockbridge, and West Stockbridge, out of the total number of kids in the district from those 3 towns. So not counting the choice or tuition students. And in that model, Great Barrington's share has historically been around 74%, give or take 2%, and both Stockbridge and West Stockbridge were about 13%, getting close with rounding to 100%. What happened when we worked on the regional agreement is the folks in Stockbridge did what's very unusual, and they voted against their own financial self-interest to support the common good. And that was really quite remarkable. And in turn, we have a new capital assessment formula where Great Barrington's share would be about 53 or so percent. Stockbridge's would be 32 or so, maybe 33, and West Stockbridge's ends up being about the same 13%. And that's based on a complicated formula that includes the assessed value of each community. And that is calculated every couple of years. So if we were to go forward with a project, we'll have a slightly different number than that, but that gives you a ballpark estimate. So that's the biggest thing we've done. We also refined our educational plans significantly, including greatly expanding our vocational programs. Right now, we've got 2 official Chapter 74 ones, which meets the state requirement for us charging full or almost full tuition to sending communities. And so that's a big deal. The 2 approved programs are in horticulture and automotive, and we hope to expand programs in small manufacturing, health sciences, potentially home building, which could include plumbing and electrical as a subset, and then potentially hospitality. And that's tied to a lot of work with the Regional Employment Board and local businesses and where there are needs and what we might do. We're also about to retire existing debt on our elementary and middle school. So that'll take off those obligations that the taxpayers have. The other 2 things that are happening or have happened is the assessed values of our communities have changed dramatically since the last vote, and that's good in some instances and problematic in others. And there have been pretty significant shifts in voters and numbers in the communities, and also what the total voting group looks like. The last thing is we've continued to do some stronger outreach and communication, and I anticipate doing more of that. So that's sort of the things we've done, some very publicly and some behind the scenes, to set up a high school project. On the next part is what's happened with the MSBA. So the MSBA is the Massachusetts School Building Authority, and they've invited us into their eligibility period. And in some articles, I've described that as a minor miracle. They approved 17 projects this year. and rejected 42. So that we got back in is a particularly big deal. What we need to do now is do part of what we did previously, which is a feasibility study. And that looks at both enrollment and tries to come up with a preferred option. So through their process, they want us to look to reach agreement on enrollment numbers. And I'll talk about that in a sec, because that's actually in flux a little bit. And then they want us to look at three possibilities: renovation, a renovation and an addition, or a new building. And after forming a building committee, doing all this work, bringing in architects and designers to help us do that, we'll end up with one preferred option. And that would be the option that we would have costed out, that would then go to the voters, hopefully, for their support. In the last month or so, since we got this news, my school committee voted unanimously to move forward with this. And I've been speaking to the select boards and the finance committees in each of the three towns to request their recommendation or endorsement for the warrant article that goes before the public. Other things we'll be doing in the near future is appointing a building committee. The school committee will do that, and then engaging the community, and that's an obligation of the MSBA process. And then the second piece, which isn't an obligation, but it just makes common sense, is they'll also likely appoint an outreach and communications committee, where people become ambassadors for the project and both listen and gather a lot of feedback and share ideas as they emerge. And hopefully what that will do is set up a successful vote. There are a couple elephants in the room that people wonder about if you're following the paper much. And one of those is what's happening with the 5 towns to our south that compose the Southern Berkshire School District, and whether we're going to consolidate or not. So there's a process going on to make sense of that. The consultants recommended that we do consolidate, that the elementary and middle schools are largely left alone, and that the high schools go to one campus at Monument. So when I mentioned earlier the enrollment challenge, in the previous project, the agreed upon enrollment was around 570 students. We think a single district enrollment would probably be right around there, maybe a little smaller, 550. And if we were to do a combined high school, the enrollment would be 700, maybe 730 or so. Those are both hanging out there as possibilities. And one of the things I'll be working with the MSBA on is for us to get permission to look at the implications of doing it both for a 1-district high school or a 2-district high school. And I'd like to leave that door open, because even if the 8-town committee could reach a recommendation, then the next step with that would be to form a new, or to create a new regional agreement for the newly configured 8 towns, and then for that to be voted on. So the timing of this might not line up perfectly right. So that's why I'd like to leave open the 2 options. The reason enrollment is so important in the MSBA process is enrollment largely, and programming to a degree, but both of those together drive square footage and how big a building to build. So as we're in this eligibility period, we do some compliance stuff. We form the building committee. We work more on our educational profile and our enrollment process. A lot of capital planning documents, And then the last part of this is securing local authorization for funding, which is the $1.5 million. Then the next couple steps are forming a project team and doing the feasibility study. Part of the reason why we're asking for support to borrow for the feasibility work is the MSBA will pay for that once, and they paid for it already with our previous project, right? So because they only pay for it once, we now have to support the funding of that work. A question that's come up in several meetings is the work we did previously still relevant? Can we use some of that? And we can use some of it, but we can't use all of it. So that's where we're at. So I'm happy to respond to questions if anybody on the committee or board has them.
Just big picture, when do you, in this process, when do you decide which of the three options you're going to do the full study on? It sounds like you're doing initial studies, which will be perhaps more preliminary on the three options. And then at some point you said you focus on the preferred option.
So the clock from the MSBA perspective starts ticking August 1st, and then we have 270 days to look at those three possibilities. So and the obligation is to look at them all. And by the conclusion of those 270 days, so sometime next spring, we'll have evaluated the renovation in the addition, and the new building, and we'll reach a determination that one is a preferred option.
And there have been numbers floating around in the local press about sort of the quote estimated cost of the new school. Are any of those numbers coming from you, or are those sort of informal numbers floating around?
I mean, I think that the whole reason to do this process is to land with some solid numbers. The original project was around $51 million, with the state paying half of it. I think just inflation this year alone, but the calculated compounded inflation over the years since the last vote, that the project it increases by several tens of millions of dollars. The vocational spaces that weren't in the previous project could be more expensive. So the number that's been kicked around in the press is $100 million. I think that's probably a little high. I think if you look at not Taconic, Wacona, which is another new high school up in Dalton as a model, the numbers might be closer to the $80 million range, and our potential reimbursement this round might be higher than the previous round. But it's really all, even me tossing out $80 million versus $100 million, like it's very premature to say any of that. And I think the whole process is to get through that. I've heard construction people talk about schools being something like $500 per square foot, and then you could do the math out of what's 125,000 square foot building cost, what's 150,000 square foot building, but then there may be additional costs on it. So it's premature to talk about it, but from an order of magnitude standpoint, I think 80 to 100 probably makes sense now.
Okay.
Anne, did you have a question?
Yeah, I have a couple of questions. Thanks, Peter. So I think you answered one of my questions, but MSBA is aware that while we're in this process of looking at the possibility of renovating or building a new school or some combination of both. There's also discussion about this merger. So they're aware that these.
Yeah, no, very, very much so. And I think in part they were really impressed that we redid our regional agreement and the capital assessment formula. That I think that's very unusual. They're also aware that discussions with the 5 towns to the south of us have been going on for 2+ years. So I think they're amenable to normally they just look at one enrollment number, the 570 or 550. I think they're amenable to looking at 2. They have a pretty tight timeline, right? So they have funding available to do 17 schools in the near future. And if too many schools get on or get ahead or get behind, then they're not able to move forward. So we'll keep talking to them about that. And my real hope would be that we're able to do a slightly larger high school with 5 other communities and afford students or really young people a wider range of options. If for some reasons those talks or those possibilities fall apart, then we have answered the question that a lot of people asked before: why didn't you talk about merging with the 5 towns to the south? Well, we've been talking about it several times a month for 2 years now. And if you haven't had a chance to look at that website, it's just 8towns.org, but it's filled with research papers and complex analysis. It's some of the, and I used to work in policy in New York City in the education department. This research that team did is super sophisticated and would stand up to the work we did in a much bigger system.
But I guess the reason I was asking is I would hate to do this feasibility study and then them say, oh, we were thinking of a different plan than you're now outlaying. So I think you've answered my question on that. But I guess then my other question is, do you have any estimates of how much will be added to your annual budget in terms of paying off or paying the loan? The borrowing of 1.5 million?
Yeah, so and we talked about this, Sharon Harrison, my business administrator, and Mark and Sue, and I talked about this. So if it does, it's not going to have an impact at all in next fiscal year, right? It would have an impact the year after. And then in all likelihood, if we do this right and make a compelling case to the voters, then they support it, and then the 1.5 million gets folded in to the bigger borrowing for the project. The debt on the elementary and middle schools is about to be retired, and so that's sort of a great trade-off. So we swap out one set of debt for a new set of debt. Where we land exactly depends a lot on assumptions that I don't know the answers to yet, like the total cost of the project. What happens with the 1.5 million? It gets split between the 3 towns to the formula that I addressed before. Great Barrington's share of that becomes something like $800,000, a little less than $800,000. In the first year, we probably do it as a short-term note, so we're just paying interest, and then it gets folded into the total cost of the bigger project. I can play around with those numbers some more.
No, again, I just wanted some, and you had mentioned about retiring the other debt, so I was thinking about that, and I mean, I guess when I first heard feasibility study, I was thinking, well, there were it sounds like almost 60 applicants and 17 made it through to the feasibility round. And then I'm thinking, well, then there'll be 4 that they select to go forward after the feasibility study. But that doesn't, from what you said, that's not how it's it's not how it works. By getting
Yeah, so
feasibility round, we're significantly likely if things go.
No, but I think very, very likely. So the formal language in their letter is a little more guarded, but um, we upfront won the lottery is the simplest way to explain it, right? That the state's committing to us on this.
And lottery where we pay out,
no, I know, right? But my expectation is as we complete all the next steps successfully, they just keep moving us forward. There's not it's the big deal is getting into this part of it, not continuing through.
Oh, well, then even more kudos to you on that one.
Yeah.
And then my last question, I'm sorry to dominate unless anybody else wants to jump in. So if we think about a new high school or renovated high school, or if we go to a merging the two regional high schools. So we're looking at this $250,000 for vocational transportation in next year's budget. And so do you think this could, if we moved forward in the new high school or whatever the renovation is, there could be even more vocational offerings?
Yeah, no, very, very much so. So, and in the study that Jake Eberwein and his folks did, there's a little geographical map of a distribution of enrolled students in approved vocational programs.
Oh.
And there's something like, I think these numbers are right. I don't have it in front of me, but like there's 600 students up in North Adams at McCann Technical, and there are 400 or so students in vocational programs at Taconic. And in all of South County, and they're all with us, there are 47 students. So if we're able to expand our numbers to 300 or so, I think the likelihood of kids traveling to Taconic will go way, way down. It's a really hard, driving to Pittsfield from Great Barrington is not a particularly big deal, right? Riding on a school bus from Great Barrington to Pittsfield is a big deal. It's a lot of time. And the early numbers, there are more students accepted into Taconic this year. Whether they actually enroll and start is a whole nother thing. So I'm keeping my fingers crossed. But if we offer high quality programs in our local school and kids have an opportunity to be in school with their neighbors and continue to participate in athletics and the musical and other activities on top of that, I think that it's very likely that they'll stay local. And this was the case with the elementary and the middle school when we built them as new buildings. You always see a slight bump in enrollment because people are attracted to the new or renovated building, and that's definitely been the case at both Wacona and Taconic, and even Greylock, which did a renovation and an addition.
All right, thank you. Those are all my questions.
Okay.
Okay. Well, it sounds like you have quite a challenge in your hands to manage this process along with the regionalization process that's going on, albeit which is technically separate, but I'm sure it's going to demand your time, and keeping those two sorted out is going to be a challenge. But we put in an enormous amount of work so far, and I'm sure we'll figure out a way to handle that. Okay, so if there are no other questions, I think that we would need to vote to make a recommendation regarding the warrant. Does that sound about right, Anne?
Yeah, I think we need to make a motion, and I'm not sure the wording of the motion. So we make a motion to recommend did we get a warrant?
Yeah, you have a warrant article. So I think, and Sue or Mark, correct me on this, I think and I don't know what number it is in your whole thing, but to recommend the warrant article on authorizing borrowing for the Monument Mountain project. I think that does it.
So I would like to make a motion that the Finance Committee recommend the warrant article authorizing the borrowing on the Monument Mountain feasibility study for 1.5 million.
Well, that's the total amount, and the amount would be
The Great Barrington, right? Barrington's share. Why don't I say that? To recommend that the Finance
about
Committee.
74% of that number. Yeah.
Right. No, Sue's shaking her head.
The article's written.
We lost your audio, Sue.
Your microphone. Do you want to call me on the cell and tell me what you were saying?
You can't hear me at all.
Well, you're just garbled. Just when
Yeah.
you tried turning, no offense intended, just try turning off your video, and you might do better that way.
All right, does
Try
that
again.
work?
Yes.
I can't get the two to work together, apparently.
Well, the strings
So the
can
article-
work better this way. Yeah. Go ahead.
The article is written that we approved the 1.5 million. The school department prepared that article for us. Peter, is that correct?
It is, and both bond counsel and the MSBA approved that. So maybe it's just to
I think it's because we actually also, I think we approved the school
the
budget.
full budget, and then you're assessed your share of it, right?
So we're approving adding to the school's borrowing budget 1.5 million for the feasibility study.
Yeah, that's correct.
Well, hopefully it should be clear either in the warrant booklet or the actual warrant or in some other materials as to how much Great Barrington taxpayers are assuming here in terms of debt. So, I mean, we don't need to deal with that tonight, but obviously, ideally, that should be made clear somewhere.
So do
That
folks
makes sense, Mark? Do you agree with what I said, Mark?
I'm not sure I know how to answer that question. I agree that we're voting on the 1.5 million to be assessed our portion. I'm not sure Peter will be able to have those numbers in time for town meeting.
No, I'm not asking for that. I'm not asking for that. I'm just making sure that we're all on the same page here. And your first sentence is completely correct and accurate, and I love it. Okay, it's our portion of the 1.5. That's all we need. And make sure that that's clear in the warrant. Okay. Okay. Did we have a second on that?
I'll second Ann's motion.
Thank you. And any discussion? Seeing none, roll call vote. Ann?
Aye.
Tom?
Aye.
Meredith?
Aye.
And I approve it as well. So we approve it unanimously.
All
Okay,
right.
thank you very much. I appreciate that recommendation. And I'm going to drop off the call. I wish you a good night. I'm sure we'll be talking much more about this, and feel free to call on me if I can answer any questions.
All right. Thank you.
Take care, Peter.
Yep, take care, all. Bye.
All right. Oops. Okay, so that is item 8 on our agenda. Let's move on.
I think that was 9.
Item 9.
Number 9.
Sorry.
Yeah.
Number 9. Number 9. All right, number 9 is completed. Let's go to, let's move on to number 10. We'll see if we have any speakers on that. And this is proposed amendments to the fiscal 2023 budget that we approved a month or two ago. So, I think we all gave ourselves a big pat on the back for a very seamless process on the budget. We need to reverse that a bit, given these amendments coming in. But I I'm sure based on what I see, so on each one, there's a reason and a logical explanation for all of that. Okay, I guess Sue and Mark, do you want to make some comments?
I think it's pretty well captured in the executive summary, unless you have anything you want to add, Sue.
Okay.
No, I did my best to detail that out in the executive summary, so I'm happy to answer questions if you want to go in order of
Sure.
the items as presented.
Okay. Just regarding the Taconic High School vocational program. A comment that I may have made earlier is that this is obviously something we need to do. We can't say no to these young folks looking to go to vocational school for all the right reasons. What we're looking at here is a fairly significant expenditure, the majority of which is their transportation. So I know this is sort of a relatively new development for us. Unfortunately, the timing is a bit odd in that I guess we became aware of this right after our budgetary process. But I guess, rough math, we're looking at and I understand it's an estimate, but it's about, what is it, about $175,000 for the transportation, if my math is correct. Is there, my sense is we don't have sort of any staff in town that's sort of set up to supervise and structure and figure out the logistics of this program because we don't do it. We rely on the regional school district to do it. So just a staffing question, if you Mark, is who's going to figure this out? And maybe the obvious question is, maybe you've done this already. Are we going to reach out to the school districts to sort of see if we can get some guidance from individuals that in fact do this as part of their jobs?
Yeah. Yes. So Sue and Tate Coleman worked on setting up transportation for our current vocational students. So I would imagine that we'll continue to work with the busing company that we're using. If not, it's too soon to tell. We just found out about these additional students. So we may have to work with Massini and certainly through the high school and through Berkshire Hills, since this is what they do, organized transportation. This is not something we normally do unless it's for vocational students.
Understood. I understand. And that I strongly encourage you to reach out to Berkshire Hills School District to get some assistance on this. And I would ask if there's some specific reason why we cannot ask them or why they cannot assist us. I would just ask that you raise that to the committee at some future meetings. Because again, it's a significant number, and there could be a fairly meaningful difference in how we provide that as transportation. It needs to be done. It needs to be safe. But I just want to. It can vary significantly in its cost, obviously. So
yeah, we're going from. We're going from using CRT for one student to several students now. So I think we do have to have a conversation with Berkshire Hills. I agree.
Okay.
So
great.
do you have anything you want to add to that?
The only thing I wanted to add is just go back to
We're losing you, Sue.
like 5 minutes try to yell. Can you hear me?
Maybe a bit
Yeah.
better.
Oh my God, this is crazy. So I just wanted to correct the numbers. Transportation is about 150,000. The tuition's 100. That's the way it's breaking down.
Because it's
Okay.
it's 19,000 per student, and there's now 5 students, right? That makes sense.
Yes.
Okay. Yeah. Sorry. My math was bad.
So, my God. So we went from 1 to 5, and that's why it's this significant jump.
Yes.
Yeah. My God.
And the reason we didn't know at the time of budgeting is because the process, they don't accept the students till April. They don't know anything until April. So there's not much we could do with that.
Right. And, I'm not sorry that Peter dropped off, but it couldn't increase again, right? I mean, this is it, right?
Correct. The cutoff is April. So they had to wait till the cutoff date to tell us the number of students. So no, I do not believe it can increase again.
But this could happen again next year based upon that calendar. We could go from 5 to 10 next year. So
that's correct, because now that we have these 5, they're just starting. So we will have them for the next 4 years. Well, we will have 4 for the next 4 years. The other student, I think, will have 4 years.
Tom wanted to ask a question.
Yeah, could we ask the school district if they have any money in their E&D fund, maybe to help subsidize some of this transportation cost, since it was unanticipated? Somebody could maybe ask Peter or Suze.
Sure.
Or
I mean, I think last time this came down the pike at the last minute for us. I remember when we did the research around this 2 years ago or 3 when it first came forward. Other towns that are in this situation. I mean, all the towns that are in this situation are complaining about it because they find themselves in the same situation as us. But the towns that have had it for a long time and been aware of it have revolving funds to help fund these situations. We just, we've never been prepared for that. We just don't have the funds. But yeah, it's pretty, it again, I think it shows, these students see these opportunities and they want to make use of them. So, we want to support the students in that, but the cost is just astronomical. So.
Mark, can I also ask that we communicate to the school, to the schools that basically this timing mismatch on the with respect to the town's budgetary process?
I don't think there's anything we can do. This exact situation has come up in the other 2 communities that I've worked for too. One way we were able to work around it in my other communities was to just automatically budget for X amount of students every year. And that's something maybe we should consider in the future.
good idea.
Well, I know this is not easy, but I mean, is there a way that we could basically mention this to Taconic High School that this particular timetable that they're on for getting these, I guess, indications of interest from the students is a bad fit relative to the budgetary process?
We could certainly pass that message along.
Yeah, I would be willing to bet they're not going to say, sure, we understand and we'll change it next year. But I think it's important that they just know that there's this built-in problem, and I can see all the towns will have it. So if success will be a big problem for the Taconic High School vocational program from a budgetary standpoint.
So I just want to let folks know, Steve Bannon is in the audience and he's requesting to talk, so I'm going to promote him up to talk. So Steve, go ahead.
Yeah, just a couple things there. One is that Taconic, like every other school district, doesn't accept students till they see what their students from their towns are coming to Taconic. So they're not going to, that's what we do with school choice. We don't open school choice up till later in the year. It doesn't affect anyone like this does, but it's just the way the process works. And Tom, we would love to use E&D, but our budget is done too. And we've sent it on to the towns already. So we're in the same boat. It's just a terrible process. And for schools, and I think you all know this, we close our budget before we know how much money we're actually getting in from the state. So all around, the timing of these things are just horrible. And I think Mark is right. What we do with special ed students, never knowing how many we're going to have to go out every year at a price of $100,000 a student or more, is we just budget for so many slots. And if we budget for 6 and there's only 3, then it drops to free cash. And if there's 6, we have it budgeted. I think this is the third year I think this has happened to the town, and I think it's become a trend now, and we have to accept it.
Okay, no, that's helpful to know. Yeah, so it definitely will affect our budgetary process next year, because again, not being too close to it, but everything I read suggests that this program will become increasingly popular. So we'll just have to factor that into the budget next year.
But just to reiterate what Peter said, if our plans go well, we will have 5 or 6 CVTE programs at Monument, and for a number of reasons, financially, etc., that may slow down the number of students going to Taconic.
Okay.
A few years off, but
yes. Okay, thank you. Okay, so if no further questions on the vocational program, we can move to Chief Berger, who is, I think, is with us to talk about his additional funding need.
Yes, as part of my normal budget planning process, I reach out to everybody to find out whether or not there are going to be any increases to any of our expenses. And I did that this year with regards to hydrants for both Housatonic Water and the Great Barrington Fire District. Housatonic Water told me that there was going to be an increase this year when they go for a rate increase, but they didn't know what it would be. So I threw 10% in the budget. That was taken out, if you remember correctly, during my budget meetings. Then afterwards, a couple weeks ago, the fire district voted to set the rates for water and hydrants at their meeting. And after they had initially told me they didn't expect there to be any increases this year, they upped hydrants 10% and water rates 5%. So that comes out to be, we pay them almost $65,000 a year in hydrant rentals. So 10% comes out to $6,500.
Well, do you mind if I jump in, or did you have something to?
No, I will say, well, first of all, Chief, you've handled this exactly the way I prefer that you did. So I cannot be critical of the funding request on that basis. So I totally understand it. I guess I'd be curious to ask the fire district what was behind their decision to increase the rates, but that's not something we would take up with you. Go ahead, Ann.
Yeah, I guess, here's another. I mean, it's odd that they decide their rates after our budget season when we have to set our budget. So I just don't understand why they aren't setting their rates. It is the Great Barrington Fire Department. This isn't even, we're not talking here about a regional school district or schools outside of our region. So I think they should set their rates before the budget season. That said, and, I also recall our conversation where we, you had come before us with an increase to Housatonic Water Works, and when we heard that the Great Barrington Fire District was indicating that they weren't going to increase, we thought, well, then why is Housatonic Water Works? So they left us with misinformation that led us to not be able to sort of work with all the information in the budgeting season. I will say, when I saw your 6,500 after the 250,000, I thought you definitely know how to present a number. But I mean, I think it's a place where we have to do it. But I guess I just don't understand why they set their rates after we have our budget season, since they're part of our budget. But I don't understand that. Is that every year they do it after?
Frequently, I think, but in past years, they have always accurately told me whether or not their rates were going up, and this year they didn't. Requesting that they set their rates earlier, I mean, that's certainly something we can do. To the best of my knowledge, they're not waiting on, obviously, the later they do, the more accurate information they have. The same as, the cost of everything's escalating. So them figuring out their budget, is also, municipal budgeting in general is done so early that it's quite challenging sometimes. So that might be their reason. I don't know. But I definitely don't think it's as complicated a process as, figuring out how many students Taconic will take in or anything like that. So I can definitely request that.
Yeah, or we could have them come to the budget meeting next year and tell us, not what, that way you don't end up having to be the go-between and then they suddenly say, oh, it wasn't what we told you. So anyway.
Why don't we just start this out by, I'll reach out if no one objects, I'll reach out to the fire district and just ask them about this and just.
Yeah, that would be great.
You don't need to ask Chief Berger to do any more on this. And so perhaps we'll understand their process a little more if we reach out to them. Any further questions for Chief Berger? Okay, well, I think that covers that. Chief, you're free to stay for the last item and our vote, whatever you prefer. And
I believe I have one more thing coming up. So.
Okay. Yes, I'm sorry, I forgot. Yes. And then last is the Department of Public Works is requesting an increase to the capital budget of $70,000. And I'm just going to read this because Sean is unable to attend tonight's meeting. And he, in fact, is obviously, as has been announced, he's taking another position with another town. So the Department of Public Works is requesting an increase to the capital budget of $70,000 due to an oversight. The original request for a highway truck did not include the snow fire package. And in the packet is a significant detail as to what that is and the cost estimates. And obviously, it's in simplistic language. It's the snowplow mechanism mounted in front of the truck. So it seems like an oversight, which is unfortunate, but it happens. So, does anyone want to make any other comments about that or ask any questions?
I mean, Phil, I agree with you. I think it's unfortunate, but to get a highway truck that we would want to be using for snow plowing and not have a snow plow on it seems foolhardy. So
I would agree. So we've reviewed these three amendments to the fiscal 23 budget. Do we have a motion?
Can we make a motion on all three at once?
They're in the same memo, so I'm assuming that we can.
Yes.
Oh, Sue has her hand up. Sue, do you want to try?
Yeah, I have one other additional change to the capital that came in after the packet went out with deduction. Can you guys hear me? Because I'm like
Yeah, Sue, the problem is definitely your mic. It's not with your connection. So just
I know I can't do anything about it.
okay, we hear you fine right now. Whatever you're doing now, keep doing it.
Okay, I will do my best. So there's another change to the capital, but it's reduction and it's in the wastewater. And if I lose my mic, Paula Eli is on, I believe, as an attendee. So she speaks to that. You guys can. So the wastewater, there was a duplication. The item that said high pressure sewer jetter is the same thing as the high pressure sewer cleaner. Somehow two quotes were submitted with different names on them. You'll remember them in your budget book. So we are striking the jetter, which was, I think, approximately $102,000, and the sewer cleaner will stay. So total wastewater capital is $4,005, $251, $405,251.
Okay, so that was, yes, I forgot. You mentioned that to me and I forgot to bring that up tonight, but that is the good news of the evening. When you say the fiscal impact of these three changes in your memo, does that include that fourth positive change or does it exclude that?
Well, it wouldn't include number 3 or number 4 under my recommendation. Actually, I didn't have it in the record. No, it was under the fiscal impact. The capital budget increase will have no impact until fiscal.
All right, okay,
Because
so
we don't-
it's 2 operating budget
Correct.
change, increases to the budget, and then the last 2 are plus and minus to the capital budget. Do I have that right?
Yes.
Okay.
Bill, can you remind me, in the packet, was this in part 1 of the packet or part 2 of the packet?
It is all in part 1 of the packet.
In part 1, okay. I'm just, I've got it, yeah, okay.
So a point of clarification, Sue, is with respect to the fiscal 23 operating budget, which not the capital budget.
Yeah.
You indicate that you talk about the net effect on the tax levy as being an increase of 3.2%. But just to make sure that I'm looking at this the right way, net of these changes, the increase in the total budget is now 4.1%. Whereas prior to these changes, the 23 budget was, I believe, 3.5%. I'm going out of memory now, 3.5% above last year.
Where are you getting, Bill, are you getting this from the packet?
No, I'm not. I'm doing it. Yeah. So this is a little confusing. So I'm comparing the revised budget projection in the packet to the revised budget projection that's currently on the Great Barrington Town website under the label of revised budget. So I just want to clarify the change in the 23 budget relative to 22 after the changes that we're discussing tonight.
Okay, so I think what we're looking at 4.1% is total revenue.
Yeah. Yeah, I'm sorry, I can't hear you now. The mic is not working again.
Well, I'm not moving. I'm sorry. I apologize if my computer's not working right. You want to focus on the tax levy increase, which is the 3.2% that I quote. Does that make sense to you? Not the 4.1.
Well, so the tax, okay, so you could do either one. They're both going to basically say the same thing, but the tax levy increase in the budget before our discussion tonight was 2.4%.
Correct.
And now it's going to 3.2.
That's
Correct. The change
Okay,
is
and the
over
aggregate, if you look at the aggregate budget, before tonight, it was an increase of 3.6%, and now it's going to 4.2.
Oh, the total, but yes, total revenue. Yeah.
Right. Yeah, I'm looking at in that page is the blue highlighted line. Right.
Do you want me to pull that up or no?
Well, before we do that, let's just make sure I'm just trying to make sure I'm describing my question accurately, so I'm not confusing anyone.
Yes, so here, I am going to share a screen. So here's where you're looking, correct? This is the new budget, right? So here's the 3.2 that Sue was talking about, and this is the 4.1, Phil, that you're talking about, correct?
Yes, that's where we were.
No, this is the 4.1.
This is tonight, yeah. So this is tonight, right? So 3.2 and 4.1, and I'm trying to clarify that how much these numbers are increasing relative to the budget before tonight's discussion.
I had that up earlier. Give me 1 second. I can pull that. I was looking at the same thing, so I can quickly pull that up. So give me 1 second.
It was a 1.2% increase. Over on the tax levy, it was a 1.2. Again, I focused on the levy because that's what changed with those budgets.
So this was what I'm showing now.
Right.
Do you see where it says revised up here? So
Yes.
right, this was 1.6 here, was 3.6 and this was 2.4. And now we're looking at
Yeah, so
4.1.
the 2.4 is going to 3.2
Mhm.
and the 3.6 is going to 4.1.
Correct. Yep,
All right, great.
that's correct.
Okay. So that's the net effect of tonight's changes. I guess that, to me, that was sort of the so
And just to clarify, I mean, the bulk of the increase in the budget is the vocational transportation.
agreed, right?
Which is
And that
about-
is an estimate, and
Right, it's about 180,000. So, right. And Sue, I think in your summary you wrote the total increase is 186,500. Is that right?
Yes.
Yeah. Yeah. Mhm.
and it's fair. Is it fair to say, Sue, that transportation number, you elected to increase that a bit given the uncertainties relating to it and how it's where the town needs to do something it really hasn't done before, which I think is appropriate.
Yeah, and I based it, I went back and looked at the first year that we had taken this over and what the school department was paying Messini for the out-of-district transportation. And I just put an inflationary factor on it and knew that it was going to be at least 100,000. And Mark and I felt that we needed to put enough, extra reserves in there to make sure that we were covered, because we really don't know what it's going to cost to transport 5.
Okay, so I just, in my mind, as Dan really has said, the vast majority of this increase is really not a discretionary item. I defer to Steve and others on the technical aspects of our school system, but it's not like we could say no to these high school students who want to choice into the Taconic High School vocational program, and they need safe transportation. Okay.
I'm happy to try to make a motion here.
Please.
Go for it.
I make a motion that we recommend an increase to the town operating budget for fiscal year 2023 of 186,500 to support the vocational transportation and the Great Barrington Fire District.
Second?
I'll second it, but did we forget the Public Works? Or is that going to be?
That's going to be in the capital budget.
Oh, okay. Sorry.
No problem. Yep.
Okay, so I'll second
Any
Ann's motion.
discussion? Sorry. Any discussion? Seeing none, roll call vote. Ann?
Aye.
Tom?
Aye.
Aye. Meredith?
Aye.
And I'm aye as well, so that is approved.